Within apologetics, a lot of times we'll talk about arguments to why we should believe that God exists, and we'll approach things, we'll try to look for lines of evidence that would suggest that a God exists, that would be more reasonable to believe that God existed than did not exist. And we would approach somebody who did not believe that God existed, like an atheist, and we would say, because of these evidence, because of this argument, you should leave your atheism and come to a position of theism, that the most reasonable conclusion to draw, based on all the evidence we can see, is that a God exists. It is more reasonable to believe that a God exists than one does not. Now, there's a number of evidences, and in the past I've had conversations with atheists, and they'll say things like, well, listen, I still don't think that there's a God, right, at the end of this conversation. But even if there was, isn't it a little presumptuous to think that the God would be like the God of the Bible? I mean, you're a Christian, you're trying to say that God is this person that wants a relationship with people, or wants to interact with people, at least has some certain demands, maybe atheists might say, demands of our moral behavior. What makes us think that there is a God like that? I mean, even if a God exists, it might not be like a God like that. And if we think about it, yes, Christianity, we believe that God is a person, somebody who we could have a relationship with, a person in the way that we are a person. Somebody we could have a relationship with, somebody who has certain desires of us, somebody who would do things for us, and that he would want things done in return, that he would want our worship, for example. But other religions might believe that there's a God, but would not see God as a person the way that Christianity would teach. Other religions might suggest that God is more impersonal, that God is some type of force, some type of abstract idea, something that is removed from us, something that we could not have a relationship with in the same way that we would have a relationship with other people. God is something supernatural, and maybe God even created everything, caused everything to come into being, but that God is not a person. So why is it that Christians believe that God is a person? I mean, is this simply a matter of, this is what our belief system teaches, so we accept it? Or is there a good reason to think that God would be personal? If a God existed, that God would be personal. Now, I think that there is. I think there's actually a number of ways that we can look at this question that would lead us to believe that God is a person. Today, I want to talk about all our evidence from creation. Christians would believe that the creation of the universe proves or suggests that a God exists. Something outside the universe must exist to explain the existence of the universe, because the universe comes into being. The argument would essentially be that anything that is caused or has a beginning has a beginner, or has itself a cause. Anything that begins has a cause. The universe has a beginning, therefore the universe must have had a cause, and this cause must be something that is other than the universe. It could not be explained through time, space, matter. It must be something not natural in terms of existing in the universe, but something supernatural, and something so powerful that it could create the entire universe out of nothing. That would be the Christian argument, and modern science really does suggest that the universe has a beginning. Especially over the last 100 years, there's been a number of scientific discoveries that would suggest that all time, space, and matter, all our physical energy, originated at a point in the distant past, something that commonly would be referred to as the Big Bang. There's a point of singularity long, long ago when all time, space, and matter begins, and then leads us up to today. But if the universe has a beginning, then the Christian argument would be, well, it must have had a beginner or a cause. Something must have caused the universe to begin, to exist, because at some point it did not exist. And that's what a lot of our modern scientific evidence would suggest to us. But even assuming all that, why, even if the universe did begin, why does it have to be a personal God that created everything? Why does the beginner have to be a person? Couldn't it be some type of impersonal force? One of the theories you'll hear, I've definitely heard this from a lot of atheists, would say, well, maybe before our universe existed, other universes existed in some type of multiverse, and these other universes somehow created our universe. And that would essentially be making that sort of argument. They might not be arguing that God did it, but that some type of impersonal force that is outside of our universe exists and caused the beginning of our universe, caused our universe to come into existence. And other religious people might say it's not a person, right? Any person who believes in a God that is not personal, but is some type of sort of spiritual, sort of more of like a force. Well, maybe that kind of a God caused everything to be. Why has it got to be a person? Well, if you think about forces, I think it all comes down to the idea of forces. When we think about like like gravity, if a room has gravity, if gravity is present in the room, everything falls, right? And it's going to fall faster or slower based on how much gravity there is, but eventually everything is going to come to a rest because gravity is in the room. But if there's no gravity in the room, then things don't fall. There would never be a room in which gravity was present where things would not fall, right? There could not be a room in which there is gravity but things don't fall to the ground, because as soon as gravity exists, it starts to act on those objects, right? Assuming there's not something else that counteracts the gravity, like a table, right? If somebody's sitting on a table and there's no, and gravity is in the room, things still don't fall, right? Because they're still sitting on the table. Assuming that there's nothing fighting against the gravity, if gravity enters the room, things fall, and if there's no gravity, then things don't need to fall. That's the nature of forces. So a force basically doesn't get the option to choose whether to act. Gravity doesn't come into the room and then wait for a while and then decide to act on objects. As soon as gravity is there, it's pulling things down, and as soon as it's gone, it's no longer acting. So if God is an impersonal force, something that existed outside the universe and is powerful enough to cause the universe, and that's what began our universe, that's what caused the beginning of our universe, that's why our universe exists. Well, it would beg the question, it would make us want to ask, well, doesn't that sort of suggest that God must have only existed for moments, seconds, milliseconds before our universe existed? Because if God is a force like the force of gravity, then as soon as it exists, it must act. It doesn't have the option to choose whether to act or not. If God is an impersonal, powerful force which causes the universe to exist, then as soon as that God exists, it creates the universe. So if that means that God is only essentially as old as our universe, our question would sort of be, well, if everything has a beginning, has a cause, and this God began just almost immediately before our universe is created, well, then what caused that God? And if that God was created by an impersonal force, what created that God? And we're just kind of moving the question back one step. And yeah, now we're no longer asking what caused the universe, but now we're asking what caused this impersonal force, this impersonal God. What caused that thing? We can't go back infinitely. We know that there's an infinite regression problem here. There cannot have been an infinite amount of things that occurred in the past that lead up to today. We would never get to today. We would still be moving backwards in time. I mean, we could never get to today if there's an infinite amount of sequences before today. So there must have been something that started everything. But the only kind of thing that can choose whether or not to act, something that could exist but choose to await and not create, that thing is a person. The only thing that we know that has the ability to make a choice is a person. So ultimately, the only kind of God, the only kind of supernatural thing that we could point to that we'd say exists outside our universe, it exists, it's extremely powerful, and it created, but it didn't create the moment it itself was created. That it had existed and then at some point chose to create, that is a person. That's why one of the many reasons why Christians, we feel like we're on solid ground to believe that God is a person. That disqualifies a lot of religious ideas of the past and even some religions of the present. the only kind of religion, the only kind of concept of God that would be consistent with what we see with the evidence for creation, for the beginning of the universe, would be a God who's a person and has the option to act.